Our scripture this morning comes from John, 1 John 2, 3 through 5. It's right there in the bulletin if you'd like to follow along. And hereby we do know that we know him if we keep his commandments. He that saith, I know him, and keepeth not his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoso keepeth his work, in him verily is the love of God perfected. Hereby know we that we are in him. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word.
For I suspect a number of you here in the sanctuary today have never heard of me, or if you have, you don't know what my background is. And so I think since some of the things I have to say today that hopefully will help you on your march to heaven, to see how this flawed individual stumbled and fell in several respects of his Christian life. And so I was born in Madison, Tennessee. My father was a chemistry teacher in Nashville. He felt the burden as his brother and sister and their husband and wives felt that they needed to start another school like Madison. That was what Ellen White's idea was. And so he went back and became a general practitioner anesthesiologist. And then we moved to Knoxville in 1947. I know that's ancient times to most of you here. And yet it seems like it was yesterday. And so I grew up there. My first introduction to weather, whenever the storm clouds moved up overhead or approached, you found this guy up through about age 7 or 8 in a closet. Then I got to reading some articles out of the National Geographic about tornadoes. I said, man, this is kind of cool, you know, and so I studied more about them and so forth. And then from then on, about age 9 and above, I would say, my mother, instead of saying, come out of the closet, she says, get in here before you get struck by lightning. And so weather was my whole life from then on. I started taking measurements in 1960, and I still do it today on a daily basis, precipitation and rainfall and so forth. And so I hoped when I got through my high school and college education that I could become a meteorologist. And the Lord saw fit to allow that to happen. I was engaged to be married at that time, and the young lady, about 6 weeks before we were to be married, got her state boards for being an RN. And that evening on the way home, she said, it's off. So obviously, having devoted about 7 years of my life to that lady in hopes that I would marry her, it didn't happen. I, in the meantime, got a job at the National Climatic Data Center in Asheville, North Carolina. And I had wanted to work in the Weather Service or FAA because I had my pilot's license. But all that was 24/7 work schedules. The one thing I did get right was the Sabbath was still special to me, enough to where I said, I am not going to compromise for that. And one of the men there at the University of Tennessee said, "Hey, you're taking the weather observations here at the UT site. Don't you realize where you send these records?" And I said, "Well, I really hadn't paid any attention to it." He said, "Well, at the National Climatic Data Center, they work 5 days a week." So I go there. They accepted me, and I worked there for 27 years. Never had to work on Sabbath. I met my now 51-year marriage to Yolanda because she was already working there. She was not an Adventist, never heard of one until I showed up. And so it was all those things rolled into one. I'm a nut about the weather, and we'll get into that a little later. And so this sermon, and I appreciate Jeff's sermon of about a month ago where he said, "This is about me. When I look out at you, I see nothing but saints." Because I'm not supposed to be judging. I have no right to judge. So I don't know what your story is. But I assume that by the fact that you're here today, you want to become a citizen of heaven. And so hopefully some of these things that you're about to hear will help you on that goal. And so these 10 steps to a better life are the 10 commandments. But today we're going to get a little deeper than just the surface reading of them. They are the expression of God's law and has told us such. And it's somewhat similar to guarantees and warranties of whether it be a cell phone or a watch or a video camera, all those things. They have a list of things that don't do or do, and if you don't, their warranty is invalidated. And so you're on your own if something goes wrong. So in that aspect, the 10 Commandments are basically one big warranty. And as it is with the manual warranty, we have a choice. We can ignore the advice about some electronic device or the car or whatever, or we can follow it. So we're not serving a mandatory God. He still makes it a voluntary decision on each of our parts. And so I just thought I'd give you a couple of examples of earthly warranties, and particularly in the older days, when you got in your car, you saw, do I have oil pressure? Do I have, what's the temperature, your tire pressure? And nowadays, most of those things are on a dashboard right there for you. But if you got a blinking red light that says flat tire, if you don't address that, you can waste a couple of $100 in about 100 yards. And this is for you, Terry. He's a pilot also. It's a little more complicated in that device. And I must say, even though I only have 770 hours as pilot in command, they were 770 hours of the best of my life. Just particularly that first day when I was allowed to go by myself and did that solo. But in a larger airplane, and particularly commercial aircraft, they have well, you ought to check the weather before you even start out. That's a good idea. But once you're in the cockpit, you have a pre-taxi checklist. You have a taxi checklist. you have a pre-takeoff checklist. And a very important part of that is, do you know what a yoke is in terms of an aircraft? Steering wheel, basically, or it's a joystick in some of the aircraft. But most have this device that allows you to steer the aircraft. This is left, this is right. Pull back is to climb, push forward is to descend. Well, I was aware of something that happened at the East St. Louis airport when I landed there in 1968 on my cross-country flight, solo flight. And one of the technicians there told me that they had had an accident about 3 days before when a squall line was approaching the station, or the airport. And the man who owned an aircraft also, he didn't have what we call a device that sticks into the column to keep your controls from being rattled around in the wind. And so he asked one of the technicians to drop a machine bolt into that slot. He came out 3 days later, fueled up, taxied out. He's on a small airport, maybe 3,000 feet long. He got off the ground, but he couldn't climb over the trees at the end of the runway. And he is no longer with us. So he forgot that very important thing. Do I have freedom of motion? And this guy made a mistake one day. Then you just say, nah. We'd fly from Asheville back to Knoxville, there at Little Creek. That's where I learned to fly. My cousin taught me for nothing, just gas and oil. And but the checklist is, when you park the aircraft, one of the things you do is cover what we call the pitot tube. This is the ram air that tells you what your airspeed is. We went over there on a Sunday afternoon, ate with the parents. We were there for 3 hours. It's middle of the summer, hot and steamy. Come back out, I check everything else. We get in the airplane, and now we're talking about 1,800 feet. And it takes you about 1,500 on a day like that to get off the ground. And as soon as I get off the ground, I like to see what my airspeed is. And I look, and I have 0 airspeed. And I'm saying, not good. And then I said, oh yeah, I didn't put the little cap on the pitot tube, and a mud dauber in 3 hours stuffed itself in the mud. So I landed, declared I just needed to land at McGee Tyson, and I said, a mud dauber's plugged up the thing. And he said, did you get stung? I said, no, everything's okay. I just need to land and clear that pitot tube, because I didn't want to start over the Smoky Mountains on a hot, steamy day and not know what my airspeed was. So just the little things, but all it takes is maybe a series of little things and you have an accident. Remember that the law written on the 2 tablets of stone were a restatement of God's law. He says, I do not change, so his law does not change either. But he was speaking to a multitude of not only what would become his Jewish nation, but also people from Egypt and other lands probably who were also enlisted in this slavery of building pyramids or whatever it might be. They're out there in the desert, and their knowledge of God, particularly for the descendants of Jacob, it had been 200 years since he had died before the Exodus, and so there wasn't a whole lot of family hand down of information. And so the Lord is trying to reach these individuals, and his tablets of stone were the best way he could do that. The exacting precepts of the Decalogue stress the justice of the author, but also those commandments are also a reminder of his grace. For it was he who miraculously had delivered them from slavery. And let us not miss the order in which this takes place. He first saved them. He didn't give them the law and then save them. He saved them first. And it's the same for us today. His blood has made it possible that if we accept it, that we can live his life within us. All the humanly devised laws and the obedience or disobedience of them deal with man's actions and speech. God's law is the only law that can effectively control not only our actions and speech, but our thoughts. And thoughts are where actions are developed. Also, therein lies one major difference between God and man, and we already kind of touched on that. We can't read each other's minds, and therefore we have no right, we don't have the ability, thank the Lord, to judge someone else. Fact is, he says, whatever criteria you use to judge someone else is what I will use when I judge you in the last day. And so, back to me. About 30 years ago, it might be 33, I don't know. But anyway, a lifetime for many of you. I was truly shaken when the pastor at the church we were attending at that time started his sermon by saying, the 10 Commandments are only minimum standards. And it was like, man, alive, this is the rich young ruler. Forget about the rich part, but the young ruler who goes to the Lord and says, I thought I was a pretty decent guy. Hadn't killed anybody. Fact is, I saved a man's life on our honeymoon in Hawaii when he'd had too much to drink and was out in the riptide and going under. Without the Lord's help, I would have never accomplished that because I'm not that good a swimmer. Then the pastor read what Jesus said in Matthew 5:21 and 22, among many others, but we'll only talk about two of them in this part of the sermon. You have heard it said by them of old time, thou shalt not kill, and whoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. And here's where it gets heavy. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And then in verses 27 and 28 of chapter 5 of Matthew, he says, you've heard it say, you're not supposed to, or thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looks on a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Again, we're talking about thought. Now, with these comments in mind that we have just read, let's look at the 10 Commandments, which I consider rules of life, and consider them from the perspective of obedience of thought. For it is out of thoughts that words and actions arise. And that first commandment, and these are not King James, but hopefully you'll get the point. You must not have any other gods before me. This use of the singular tense in this case indicates that the obedience is a personal thing. I can't share you my obedience, or I can't ask your obedience for me. It's what I'm doing. And that being part of God's nation or God's church is not a free pass to heaven. Now, you don't have to answer this next question. This is for me. Have you ever had another God before our Creator? Unfortunately, to be honest, I have had. I'm not proud of it. And I'm sure there's a couple in here that say, I bet I know what it is. And you probably would be right. It's spelled W-E-A-T-H-E-R. Weather. You say, how could that be a God? Again, I repeat, he gave me a job. He gave me a wife. Didn't have to work on Sabbath. But beyond that, I voluntarily assumed other tasks, both within my 8-hour workday and afterward, doing weather safety presentations, talk to pilot groups, even to air traffic controllers, you name it. If somebody wanted to talk, whether it's the Civitan Club, I'm there. And this grew to such a point that I had no time for God or my wife. And as I stand here before you today, I can honestly say it's because neither one of them gave up on me. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Step number 2, you must not have any carved or cast likeness of anything living in heaven above, or earth beneath, or the sea below. You also must not bow down to them or serve them, for I am a jealous God. I find it interesting that the people who worship these images did not view them just as an emblem, whether it be a bottle of water or a book. Things were carved out of whatever was carvable. They actually believed that their God was in the bottle or was in the structure that they had in their hands. And at the same time, if he knocked that off on the floor, it would lay there the rest until somebody else picked it up. No life in it. Absolutely nothing to be gained from it. And it goes on, this comment goes on to say that some of the people who did some really nice carving, and those of you who have been, well, right here in our own country, there's people who have a real magic touch to carving wood into wonderful things, whether it's an eagle or a rocking chair. But there's no life in either one of them. But it says that the people who their skills was their only way of making a living were looked down upon the people who took the things they carved and made a god out of them. Makes no sense to me at all, but that's the way it was. And since Yolanda and I have been on a number of trips overseas with evangelistic meetings, when we went to India, it seemed like every time you turned around, there was hundreds of carved items that could be purchased. And unfortunately for us, our village that we had to go to from where we stayed each night, we had to pass the monkey god. And he wasn't just a little monkey. It was a statue that was 150 feet tall. Kind of a normal shape of a man and everything with a monkey head. Number 3, you must take the name of the Lord, must not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. This word vain can also be translated as iniquity, falsehood, or vanity. My wife and I stopped watching most TV program, well, all the ones, these situation comedies and so forth, decades ago when they started using the Lord's name in vain. That just doesn't, we'll turn it off or not even turn it on to begin with. But nowadays, it's even that way with the news. They'll bleep out the 4-letter curse words, but they'll let the GD or the JC come through. Whether it's somebody who's just experienced a death in the family due to a storm, or whether it's a contention on the highway between a police officer or whatever, that language is allowed to come through. And in 1996, getting back to weather again, a movie came out that was supposed to be super good for computer graphics. It was called Twister. Anybody remember that? Good. At any rate, a young man who I supervised at the Climate Center, he's 20 years of age and was the general manager of a 8-screen multiplex theater in the local mall. So when the movie came out, I said, hey, check it out. Is there a profanity in this, particularly the Lord's name in vain? And he says, okay. Came back, okay. All right, I said, you got to watch it again. I want to know, is there any use of the Lord's name in vain in that movie? Just don't watch anything else, none of the graphics. Just listen to the words. Week later, it's good. So Yolanda and I went to see it. In the first 3 minutes, JC, GD, he was totally oblivious to that sacrilegious use of our Lord's name. Okay. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days a week you are given to do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God, and in it you should not do any common work. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, sea, and all that is in them. And I praise him for the eyesight and the ears and even a camera to be able to, pardon me, to take photographs of the things that he has made. The use of the word remember, of course, is a reminder that God created the world in 6 literal days, not evolutionary thousands of years or whatever. So, are we keeping the Sabbath if all we do is to stay away from physical labor? What about the mind again? Is it thinking about things other than Sabbath? Guilty. When I was growing up, UT football, that's where I went to school. Never watched a game on Sabbath in my life. But when Dad would take us to the Smokies to get away from it all, and you pull into a turn off or something to look at the view, it's Saturday afternoon, and there's probably at least one, maybe a dozen cars sitting there with the game on. So guess who is listening to see if I can hear what the score is? And maybe even guilty as charged. Number 5, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God has given you. Another purpose of this commandment is to develop respect for all rightful authority. Also included in this is that those that are in authority, whether it be in the home or the workplace or wherever, that they must conduct themselves in such a manner that they are ever worthy of respect and obedience by those they supervise. 6, you must not kill. Jesus magnified this to include anger. Not only anger, but contempt. And later the Apostle John added hatred. And all of these begin in the mind. Not only does this commandment forbid violence to the body, but what is of greater consequence is injury to the soul. We break the commandment when we lead others into sin by our example and action, and thus contribute to the destruction of their souls. It's time for another story. Went to Little Creek, and we'd have homecoming. And when other students of my age and even some younger, and they'd say, "How you doing, Grant? I remember you. You were the guy who could lift the front of a medium-sized tractor." Didn't say, "Hey, you were a good witness to me," or you led me on a straighter path to the Lord. No, they said, "Because you could lift the front end of a tractor." And I don't glory in this, but I had been in the gym for a number of years, and I could deadlift 500 pounds. So this particular tractor was only about 400. But at any rate, I'm ashamed of that. I wish somebody could come to me and say, "Man, you really showed the Lord to me." I can't say that for that group. She says, "Those who corrupt the innocent and the virtuous kill in a far worse sense than the cutthroat or the bandit." Number 7, you must not commit adultery. This prohibition covers more than just adultery. It also includes fornication and the impurity of any kind in act, word, or thought. This is our third commandment, indicating the duty towards our neighbor, to respect and honor the holy bond upon which the family is built. A marriage relationship to a Christian should be as precious as life itself. You must not steal. Here's the right to possess property is set forth. It is a right that is to be respected by others. For society to exist at all, the principle must be safeguarded. Otherwise, there's no security and no protection. And it's my observation that we're there now. It is well to remember that the concealment of defects or misrepresentations of quality are all the acts of thieves and robbers. And the story to confirm that occurred in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where a man who had owned a drive-in theater, you young folks probably don't even know what that is, but where you could drive into a movie and you had your own sound box that you'd set on your window. But that had gone away with the DVDs and that sort of thing. And so they had this paved surface drive-in theater filled in about a foot of dirt. Opened it up as a mobile home park. So in Fayetteville, you're close enough to the coast that you have to take any mobile homes and have them strapped to something secure in the earth. Now, I don't know about the ladies. I don't want to say that you're not good because you don't know what I'm going to be talking about here. Have any of you ever seen about a 5-foot-long rod that's used to anchor telephone poles? It's about an inch in diameter, 5 feet long. It has an eye, a metal eye at the top of it. And at the bottom, it has an auger screw to where you can stick a rod through the eye and have enough torque to twist this thing in, hopefully, to where only about that much or the eye shows up. Well, I think some of you probably already see what's coming. They couldn't get any deeper than 12 inches. because they ran into the pavement. So rather than try to break through the pavement and go ahead and screw it on down, what they did was took a cutting torch and cut out 4 feet of that anchor and repainted it to make it look like it's 5 feet in the ground. Downburst, strong windstorm, wasn't a tornado. Wind speeds estimated between 70 and 80 miles an hour. The trailer took flight. Killed one, left the other paraplegic for life. All because somebody was willing to misrepresent this tool. You must not bear false witness against thy neighbor. This commandment is most often broken in public manner by untruthful witness testifying in court. Perjury has ever been a serious issue. In Greece, they fined you. In Rome, you didn't live anymore. And another personal example. I'm working, well, I need to back up just a second. Yeah, I'm about to run over here. Any rate, an attorney, I was subpoenaed to be a fact witness in a case between American Inca outside of Asheville, which is a textile plant, and Southern Railway, $17 million lawsuit. They took an assembled rain gauge total list that I had, and it was indicating that all these numbers were the 4-day total, because it didn't rain the same length of time in every place. But in the major place that this water and eventually a debris slide, and when I say debris slide, I mean after it's come down the 50-degree slope onto about a 20-degree slope, it cleared out the forest sufficiently in width that you could build an interstate through it. At any rate, it flooded the plant. Well, somehow that list of mine got rewritten, saying that these were 12-hour values, not 4-day. And the lead attorney for American Inca, because we didn't have security in those days, this is in the late 70s, he came into my office. When I say my office, I worked with about 12 people in the same room. And he says, "You've got to change your document to say that it's 12 hours. And I said, "I will not." I said, "Even if the court didn't know, he knows, and I serve him." He stayed there for 45 minutes till the end of the workday with 11 other people, and he's talking louder than I'm talking right now. And he followed us out to our car. Had a hard time just closing the door to get him out of the way, and we drove away with him still angry. But what was positive about it was I was better prepared when I testified. And I prayed, and he did what he shouldn't have done. And he asked 3 other people ahead of me, "What time did this rain end?" And they all said about 7:30 in the morning. I had this chart that showed it was 4 days. He says, "What time does it show the rain ended?" I said, "About 7:30. I'm saying, okay, Lord, it's time for you to work. And for some reason, because it killed him, it killed his case, was he says, what time Saturday morning does it show that the rain started? I says, it doesn't, sir. It shows it started on Wednesday. And angrily, he says, no further questions. And the judge says, you may step down. I couldn't believe it. I went to the Southern Railway folks, the attorneys, and they said, that's him. No action. And the last is certainly not the least important. You must not covet thy neighbor's house, wife, or any of his possessions. This 10th commandment is supplementary to the other 9 in that it all starts as a thought that grows into adverse words and actions, such as lying, stealing, adultery, or murder. The prohibition of this commandment is fundamental to the human experience in that it penetrates the motives beyond the outward acts. It teaches that God sees the heart and that he is less concerned, and get this, he is less concerned with the outward act than with the thought that produced it. In summary, we have heard many times before that we are unable to live according to these commandments on our own. And I certainly, you can see me now, as I am, I can't do it on my own either. I've tried. We must let him into our hearts so he can live throughout us. He wants our reputations to be the same as our characters, because if they are not, then we're hypocrites doing more harm to his mission than non-believers. So I end with this thought. This is something that's just come to me in the last couple of years. I never could quite comprehend why if I broke one commandment, it wipes me out. I have a 10-digit passcode to get into my computer. Doesn't make any difference which one of those 10 digits that I miss, it won't let me in. And the question would be, would heaven be a place you would want to live for eternity if God allowed unrepentant sinners access? Gracious Father, thank you for giving my voice today without being clogged with problems that I have with my speaking at times. Thank you for that. Thank you for the message that you have brought to me, that I could share it with those here. And I'm eternally grateful for them, for it's because of this group and this church that has made me a stronger Christian since we started coming here almost 5 years ago. Thank you for that. Thank you, Lord, for your example that we all seek to follow. Amen.